3, 2, 1.
Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Poetry Business Book and Pamphlet Competition Winners Reading 2020. We've seemed to have lost a year somewhere in between, but here we are. And normally this event would take place at Wordsworth Grasmere, and the Wordsworth Trust has been associated with the work of the Poetry Business and with Peter and Anne Sansom for 10 years or more now. And it's always a great privilege for us to host the event in Grasmere, and it's such a shame that we can't be in the wonderful surroundings of the library here at Wordsworth Grasmere, surrounded by the first editions of the poet. Wordsworth Grasmere is a place where poetry is still created and celebrated today, from poetry readings and open mic sessions to residencies, from poetry groups for young and old to creative writing workshops and schools workshops. We celebrate that continuum of creativity from the past to the present day. We've moved almost seamlessly into this online sphere over the past 12 months. And one of the things that has registered with me is that one of the positive things coming out of this lockdown has been the fact that people have turned to poetry more and more, either for consolation in times of difficulty and times of grief, or for inspiration. And talking of inspiration, who could find more inspiring people in the poetry world than Peter and Anne Sansom? One of the reasons that I'm delighted that the Wordsworth Trust is associated with this event is because I'm just delighted to be able to work with Peter and Anne. They keep the flame of poetry burning bright, even in the darkest of times, and it's a real privilege to be a partner with them in this. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Peter, who's your host for this evening.
Hi, thanks everyone, and thank you, Michael. Anne and I will be introducing the poets. We'll be introducing the poets that we edited. We had 2 poets each, as you'd expect, and it was a pleasure to work with them. But we're also going to read between us the comments, aren't we? You can
the judges. Yeah, we'd like to thank the judges of the competition, Imtiaz, Dharker and Ian McMillan. And we'll read what they said about these collections. So the first reader will be Rosalind Easton, and do you want to?
And then it will be Jill, then Wendy.
No, then Sarah Wimbush, and then Wendy Pratt.
Yeah, that went.
Yeah, good. It is. So.
Good. I wanted to say also there will be time afterwards for questions. So if you want to email, chat through questions, that would be good. And I think that Susanna is on the case there. It's really strange not being at the Wordsworth Trust because it's such a venerable and important place for us, for our launches. It's a disappointment that we can't be there in real life, but it's great that Michael has allowed us to virtually take place at Wordsworth Grasmere. And I'm going to say something about our first reader. Each poet will read for 20 minutes each. Rosalind Easton grew up in Salisbury and now lives in South East London, where she's an English teacher. She studied at Exeter and then trained as a dance teacher and spent several years teaching tap, modern and ballet. I always want to say something witty and good about that. It's a great thing to do. And then before completing her PGCE at Bristol, an MA at Goldsmiths, and then, not having had enough of it, she did a PhD on Sarah Waters. This collection, Black Mascara, was an outstanding book and a pleasure to work on as an editor. What did Ian say?
Ian McMillan said, "These ambitious and skillful poems ripple over the mind long after you've read them. Love and the possibilities of love and intimacy are examined and celebrated, and quotidian adventures like bra fittings and running mascara are given the power of myth."
Whereas Imtiaz Dharker echoed it really by saying, "Full of wicked invention, whether telling the story of a road crash, love affair, or bringing inanimate objects enthusiastically and eloquently to life. A stiletto heel, a music stand, a microphone, or a wand with no spells. Every poem is a delightful surprise." We're delighted to introduce Rosalind Easton.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Peter, for that introduction. And I will just do a few brief thanks before I begin so that I don't forget later. So thank you so much to Peter for being a wonderful editor, to everyone at the Poetry Business for making all this happen. I'm really honoured to be in the company of Wendy and Jill and Sarah as well. And of course, the judges, Imtiaz Dharker and Ian McMillan, for giving me really the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life. Thank you very much. So the first poem I'm going to read is about my grandmother, to whom I was very close, and she died almost exactly 6 years ago to the day. And a lot of my love of literature and poetry comes from her. So the references in the poem, the literary references, are really things that I love because she loved them. And she trained at drama school in the 1940s. So she had this wonderful sort of Celia Johnson in Brief Encounter accent, despite coming from Manchester. And she left her training and did not go into the profession because, like so many women of her generation, she got married when she was very young, only 19. And she had a long and happy marriage, but I was always very aware that she had this huge talent and that there was this other life that she might have had. And that's really where the idea for the poem comes from. And I've included the quotation from Richard III at the beginning because she wrote that in my 3rd birthday card, which I still have. So this is found in translation from my grandmother. "Of course, I should have realised you'd come back as a book. It was in Hatchard's on Piccadilly in the classics section. The shelves were out of alphabetical order, Galsworthy, Trollope, Austen, Eliot, side by side. Just as I was thinking, I wonder, I heard your laugh, and there you were, a slender, sparkling volume, looking quite at home in such illustrious company, your handwritten name running down your spine. Evelyn Waugh was serving at the till. There's no charge, he said. She's been waiting for you. I took you home and put you next to Dickens and Gaskell, hoping you'd find some people there you could get on with. In the evenings, I'd sit cross-legged on the carpet with a glass of wine, listening, enthralled to you in your element. On the poetry shelf, Milton's pages ruffled with pride to hear that you'd learnt Lycidas by heart at 17. Wordsworth acknowledged that your annotations on the prelude had deepened his understanding. Best of all was the intellectually superior drinking game with Shakespeare. He'd call out the number of a sonnet, you'd recite it, word perfect. Your reward, a shot of apricot brandy. You read my childhood favourites to me again. Your drama school voice, not a trace of Manchester left in it. Still just right somehow, for the famous Five and Mallory Towers. But I liked your New Jersey drawl for Judy Blume's Freckle Juice best, which brought you to the attention of George Gershwin and Judy Garland and Frank Sinatra sleeping off champagne hangovers in Biography. The four of you sang Embraceable You and Someone to Watch Over Me late into the night. How sad, I thought, that only in death can one keep this kind of company. And then it struck me. I moved you to plays, and oh, you were away. Word spread quickly, and critics queued at my door, squeezed into every square inch in my small study, climbed lampposts and garden fences to listen through the open window to your Lady Bracknell, your Rosalind, your Beatrice, but also, of course, your lead role in Coronation Street, and even your first brief stint as woman pundit on Match of the Day. You always had the range. I realised then I put you in my library without reading your words, thought I knew your story, that I might have written bits of it myself. But when I turned your pages, there was your life translated, how you'd skipped rep altogether, were plucked straight from training into your debut at the Old Vic. I saw the RSC, the National, the moody black and white photographs backstage with Olivier. the sofa with Terry Wogan and Parkinson, the BAFTA red carpet, the BBC4 career retrospective, you refusing a ghostwriter and writing the best-selling memoirs yourself. Maggie Smith and Judy Dench taking calls from their agents. Sorry, they've cast her again. I went back to Hatchard's and Evelyn Waugh. How might we make this real? I asked. He lit his pipe and smiled and gestured at the sky. No returns, he said. Now, my next poem, I do have to tell a little story about this. So there is this extraordinary statistic that something like 70% of women in this country are wearing the wrong bra size. So one comes to a point in one's life, perhaps when one is past the first flush of youth, when one thinks, I really ought to go and sort this out. And one pays a visit to a certain upmarket retailer in Mayfair, but only once, because it does involve having to remortgage your house. But it is worth every penny, because it is an entirely transformative experience to learn what size you actually are. And it does make you feel absolutely amazing. And you emerge onto, it was Conduit Street in Mayfair, entirely a new person and longing to tell everyone this fantastic news. And of course you can't, because that would be too public. So I just wrote this poem instead. This is Bra Fitting Mayfair. I wonder if this might be Lingerie Oz. Toto, I don't think we're in Marks and Spencer anymore. Behind the cubicle's red velvet drapes, the fitter twangs the backstrap of my bra like David Gilmour appraising the strings of a charity shop guitar. I think of Oberon and Titania's elves who, for fear, creep into acorn cups and hide them there. The fitter checks the label, laughs, then straps me into something she says is a moulded balcony, but seems to be a blue silk dragonfly's breath, as engineered by Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Then when I read the size and shriek with joy, she swings me round to face the mirror. And Coleridge, how right you were. For these did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. The film critic who wrote of Lara Croft in Tomb Raider, a dead heat in a Zeppelin race, might well have typed those lines for me, and if I have a child, I can offend Nigel Farage with what he calls breastfeeding ostentatiously. This means sparkly nipple tassels, one assumes, and a playlist of appropriate show tunes, defying gravity from Wicked, obviously, or Dolly Parton's Islands in the Stream. But for now, there's only one song I need. Man, I Feel Like a Woman by Shania Twain. Let's go, girls, she says. Well, yes, indeed. My next poem is about the fact that I am not a motorist in the same way that I'm not 5'10" with red hair. I love the bicycle. I think it is the finest invention of all time, really. And I had a big birthday a couple of years ago, and I thought, look, I've got to learn to drive. It's time. And it just went very badly for all concerned. And there was one particular lesson where I was quite understandably failing to negotiate this sort of Rubik's Cube of a roundabout. And I said to my long-suffering instructor, look, I was born half girl, half bike. This isn't going to work. And my brain just went poem, and that's where the poem came from. But this is, you know, because I didn't continue my lessons, this is probably the most expensive poem I've written. It's a long-winded way to go about getting an idea for a poem. Girl as bike. The stethoscope answered in fluent Italian. Not a heartbeat, but the humming cadence of a Campagnolo crankset. My father understood, painted white lines around my cot, wrapped childhood injuries in handlebar tape. The moon's angle poise picked out my race geometry, one knee raised, fists loosely clenched, hands small enough to forge tiny bikes from stretched out paper clips and roll them round a fruit bowl velodrome. In my teens, X-rays confirmed bones of hollow carbon, ball bearings in the joints, sinews and ligaments of fine steel cable. So when I had to try 4 wheels and an engine, I kept energy bars in the glove box, insisted on an open sunroof in heavy rain. My instructor asked, "Why are you leaning into the bends?" I told him if I couldn't sling it over my shoulder and jog up a flight of stone steps in Milan or Barcelona, it wasn't for me. I sold the car, spent the cash on 7 kilos of hollow carbon, the fluent Italian of a Campagnolo crankset, tattooed an oily chain print inside my right calf. The last gig that I went to before lockdown was a double bill of The Pretenders and Suede at the Shepherd's Bush Empire. So that was obviously a pretty good gig to go out on. And I love Suede now. They're one of my favourite bands, but when they were in their first incarnation when I was at school, I wasn't particularly interested, for my shame. What a terrible oversight. So the second stanza of this poem is really about my friends rather than me, because I have this sort of retrospective portrayal of myself as this cool indie kid, which is entirely disingenuous. And I know there are some people watching who will know that this isn't really the kind of person that I was, but I kind of wish I had been now. But the second stanza is really for my friends, and I know some of them are watching, and I thank them for their discretion. This is The Undiminished Magnificence of Brett Anderson. Press play. The solid click and analog hiss is the sound of teenage years that can't be overwritten with tiny pieces of tape to cover the holes. Not when he's flicking his hair, still slick, still dark, still there, making the front row wet with glorious Brett sweat. Not when the low-slung thunder of Richard's Gibson Les Paul custom lets the animal nitrate riff out of its cage and we thrill to the rumble as it prowls the stage. Not when Brett unwinds the long lead of the mic and whirls it above his head, pulling tight the tangled length of memories we chucked in our bags, so they snagged on other things, making them spin on the reels again, taking us back to writing his name in Tipex on our cherry 1460s, being late for school to go to our price on the morning of release. When all our days to come were stacked to the ceiling like blank TDKs, when we didn't know it's all felt tipped in black, won't fade, grow slack, and if you don't press stop. Sometimes there's a hidden track. So that bit there is over the page in the book, which is the trick really. And that came to me at 3 in the morning. I wasn't sure what to do about that last line. I'm not going to do any kind of preamble for this one. This is fairly self-explanatory. I'm reading this one because several people have been really kind about it on Twitter. So another thanks is due there really to the poetry community on Twitter for welcoming me as a very new writer. So thank you to those who were complimentary about this. This is called Closet. You imagined emerging in full drag king regalia, perhaps swishing a superhero cape embroidered with K.D. Lang lyrics and intertwined Venus symbols, then smashing it to pieces with a rainbow striped axe. But you'd only just shut the door and settled in after years in the pre-closet holding pen, wear your waist-length hair, collection of Royal Ballet programmes, and the tears you cried at Scott and Charlene's wedding were exhibits A, B, and C in the court of why you cannot possibly belong here. And the case for the defence rested solely on the remote control you held your thumb over when you watched the Beth and Margaret kiss in Brookside, with the sound turned low and one eye on the door, as you had destroyed all evidence of the breath that caught in your throat when your best friend was shut in her room with her boyfriend and you realised it wasn't her you were jealous of. So it was years before someone broke the padlock and dragged you out to make you understand all this, at which point you wrote to everyone who had to know but already knew. You would like to thank Bombay Sapphire for their generous sponsorship of this event, only to find it still in the corner of the room the next morning, fitted with a revolving glass door for those moments when the plumber or your driving instructor asks what your husband does. And when it spins at top speed, you see, again and again and again, the 15-year-old girl who's still in there and can't come out. I had just one more poem to read. And I had the idea for this poem for about 4 years before I could see how to do it. The audience at home will find that their enjoyment of this is greatly enhanced if they Google the title, which is Tilda Swinton as David Bowie. And you will find there some extraordinary, beautiful photographs taken by Craig McDean for Italian Vogue in 2003. And of course, Tilda Swinton played Orlando in the Sally Potter film of Virginia Woolf's novel. And in the novel, it's a sort of a fictional biography, a new genre that Woolf inaugurated in all her genius. And the title character, Orlando, travels through time from the 1500s to the present day, ever so casually changing sex about halfway through. And the novel was written for Rita Sackville-West, with whom Virginia Woolf had first a passionate friendship and then a love affair. So I looked at those photographs and I saw not just all of those figures suggested by that, but of course all of David Bowie's alter egos, because she is dressed as David Bowie. So I saw all these competing identities and personas sort of inhabiting and interrupting and overlapping each other. And I just found it fascinating. And I had the photograph in my notebook for honestly about 4 years before I could see how to do it. And I hope it's worked. So this is Tilda Swinton as David Bowie. This was the lineup on the rail at the photographer's studio. Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane, the Thin White Duke, Orlando as a boy, Orlando as a girl, Vita, Virginia. At the shutter's click, you met under a streetlight on the Reaper barn, stayed up all night, fell asleep at dawn in each other's arms, and woke on a bed of oak leaves in the garden at Knoll, played guitar and sang as I was born with my hair on fire. In Paris, we held hands in an artist's impression of the street that will take my name after I'm gone. In Berlin, we danced in the watchtower's shadow, passed like gitan smoke right through the wall. Now, in this London winter, I stand on Southwark Bridge and still the waters with the life on Mars blue of my breath. Cast off your layers, spaceman, suit and tie, doublet and hose, breeches and gaiters, string of pearls, ink where blood should flow, until you are invisible. Step out onto the ice, carve your names with the blades of your skates, overwrite one with another until you have made a new language. And as you watch the freezing and melting of these curves and lines and try to decipher their meaning, ask yourselves, honestly, am I not the most beautiful thing you have ever seen? So that's me. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for coming and watching. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Rosalind, well done, really well read. I'm about to introduce Jill Penny now. Anne and I will do that together, but I'm good because I was Jill's editor. I'll read her bio note from the back of the pamphlet, which is that she's from a touring theatre and arts background, and she's a time-served member of the programming and hosting team at the Ted Hughes Arvon Centre, Lumbank. She lives just below the Pennine Way in the hills above Hebden Bridge, and she's studying for an MA in creative writing at MNU. One of the remarkable things about the competition is, of course, all the entries are judged anonymously. We had no idea that Jill had entered, and of course we were delighted. We do know Jill, and we were delighted when she won, and we were amazed by her manuscript. It's really extraordinarily good.
So Ian McMillan has said about this collection is death, love, loss, and an urgent need to take note of these things before their associations pass gives a burning carpe diem tone to the pieces.
And Imtiaz said, in your absence, it's a searingly accurate enactment of a traumatic incident and loss. The language is spare and controlled, stepping carefully around the territory of waiting, the rituals of attending a hospital bedside, the terrible confusion of death and its aftermath. Please welcome Jill Penny.
Thank you, Peter and Anne. I'd like to echo Rosalind's thanks to both yourselves and to the judges. It's been a marvellous year, and it's been quite a week as well, in that I actually submitted my dissertation on Wednesday, so I'm no longer studying for my MA with MNU, but hopefully in June I will have it in my hands. So I'm going to read some poems from my pamphlet. I'm not going to give much of a preamble to any of them because hopefully they speak largely for themselves. So I'll just start. And the first poem I'm going to read is called Blunt Force Trauma. This day, this hour, this minute, there are things I need to be true and not be true. I need it to be true that on that night it really was help offered by that young lad, not the broken ribs from 3 to 12, shattered cheekbones, both eye sockets broken, smashed nose and the fractured skull resulting from a blunt force trauma. I need it to be true that in the intimacy of a pocket, hands were searching for your phone call to help, or at the very least feeling the quality of your suit, which looked expensive, looked like privilege, which was second hand. That the lad was only asking for the time, and that I never knew the meaning of a contre-coup. I need it to not be true that there are people who have nothing, have not got a lot, that rumour had it was some Asian lad. True that he was looking for a job to get his life on track. Not true the lifelong trauma, the blunt force of care. True a lad like him could save himself from life, from dealing and enduring further blows. And most, I need it to be true that when you told the paramedics you were fine, that you were fine. Thank you. Things I see on the hard shoulder. In the days before our wild and precious lives began to choke us, before the brain bleed and the ventilator tube, I spent 50 days and nights in search of you between Manchester and Leeds. Distraught and terrified, owned by the road. I am the pulse of the windscreen wipers and the flare of lights on the westbound carriageway, dangerously distracted by the things I see on the hard shoulder. 1. Shreds of sheeting, grey as your skin, whipped, torn, forlorn, a vast ghost flapping down the whole sad length of the M62. 2. A never-ending diesel slipstream. 3. A hard hat rolling like a skull. 4. An oily rainbow, a parallel universe, a dark holding place, a reverse film on slippery celluloid. We are the flickering ones, streaming past each other, frame after frame. And 3 animals. I saw them, love, lying between us. 5. Grit-coloured cat, sex unknown, moments before, brutally kicked back by tyres, still kicking back. 3 seconds. 6. Red dog fox, solid, heavy, busted bag of bone and blood, his back to 3-lane brush, blasted by a wind rush. 3 seconds. 7. Roe deer, female, rigid with fear, eyes in headlights, blue, the blue and blinding howl of a siren. 3 seconds. 3 seconds. 3 seconds. Thank you. I'm going to read some extracts from the long title poem of my pamphlet, which is entitled In Your Absence. These are just extracts, so I hope the screen share keeps up with this, but I've got it here just in case. So this is In Your Absence. Hospital. I smoke cigarettes in the kitchen every night, waiting for the phone to ring. Counting makes me feel that I am in control when I am not. Example, heartbeat of windscreen wipers as we hurtle between London, Manchester and Leeds almost daily. Example, steps, 60, leading up onto the ward, we never take the lift. Example, doors, 5, lined up along the corridor, before we reach the door where your whispered name into the intercom admits us to the semi-darkness of the ICU like a spell. Example, breath. There is a suitcase where you were sitting yesterday. I experience extreme synesthesia as you lie there in a nylon gown. I have to leave when you cannot. Sound of respirator, smell of disinfectant, barely concealing fear. House. I placed clothes and books and coffee in the suitcase where you were sitting only yesterday. Someone has put white blinds up in the house where you were living until last year. There will be an anniversary soon, and in your absence this year will have rolled on by despite my stumbling in its path. Something haunts me. It is white, as in the whites of your rolling eyes, as in your white lies, feather, magic, bone white, water, wedding, blood cells, hope, white light, noise. There are 3 new photographs around the house. I moved them into different rooms and into drawers and out again. You are monochrome. You are drinking in New York, wearing my vintage dress. You are absent, body fading. Dream 1. The first white number, according to the rules for colouring numbers, is 66. I find this significant in ways I can't explain. Finding myself lost in colour, especially the number blue, I wrap my arms in your abandoned sheets and fall asleep before it gets dark. Dream poem. You kissed me in the blue-lit public toilets. You were passionate, as never so in life. You were eating peas out of the bird feeder. I said that was unhygienic. Irrelevant. It was always summer in the public toilet. There was a mirror made of tin. It was winter outside in the garden. Whiteout. I couldn't see you. You began to cry. A tear ran down your cheek onto the pillow. You were my neighbour in the garden. Then you weren't. Why do you come kissing me? It isn't like you. Are you making up for lost time? Dream 2. My brother and I sway together laughing underwater in our sandy beach shoes in the sweet, piss-smelling, blue-lit public toilet. Buckets emptied of our catch of crabs left outside with needles, cones and scented pines. We're walking home with Mum and Dad, trailing metal spades along Beach Road for our tea because it's 5 o'clock. My mother roughly tugs my little swimming costume down, revealing strap marks white against the red. The angry sting of sunburnt shoulders makes me howl as your absence hurts and makes me howl and is outrageous to me. Garden. Before I realised it, I was in the throes of an obsession. I spent my time in your absence, reflecting on the fact that the colour or non-colour white reflects and scatters powerful wavelengths of light, and that I experience these wavelengths physically in the presence of all things white. In the darkening days of October, continually craving this sensation and this stimulation, I planted lily of the valley, yarrow, elder, jasmine, nettles, snowdrops for the spring. In February there was snow. Some days we chose to see the snow as one. Some days we sat for hours at the window counting snowflakes, hailstone, and each frosted blade of grass before the thaw, and then at last the snowdrops. White is nothing but a startling absence, although in my experience is the opposite of absence. I know what absence looks like, and it is not white, it is not innocent, or pure, or safe. It is, however, true that white stains easily. but all things are mutable. Example, blossom from the cherry tree in April is abundant, annual, short-lived. Example, one foxglove, white, grows from the same place in the dry stone wall biannually. Example, the plastered cherub with one arm, the Buddha, and the chalk face in the garden crumble quietly into heaps of dust, a little more decrepit every year. Other white things I spend my time considering are ashes in the fire pit, reminiscent of another scattering of ashes. Fake pearls clinging to a dress, cocaine, lies, more lies, a tribe of cats, blank notes in a notebook, feathers flying from a slit pillow, the clouds in my eyes. House. Immersion in the colour or non-colour white aids mental clarity. So in the bright days of July, craving this sensation and this stimulation, I painted every single room in our house white and hung white curtains for my birthday. I keep them closed all day and watch the shadow play of birds and ivy from my bed. It's not okay. There are hundreds of rooms in our house. Most are accessible only through the dream door. Awake and up all night, I stare into the bathroom mirror and then into the white space where you ended up before the whole thing ended. Up into the empty attic with the dizzying drop and bed our children were conceived in, down into the living room with its garden doors, our stained glass windows bringing colour to the white walls. I think about us, bringing the piano home in a horse box. It's where I stand most nights, leaning on it as I would a friend, looking back into the empty rooms. I can't stay here. Garden. In August, we made a wreath with white flowers, honesty and May blossom, said to be unlucky if brought into the house. Irrelevant. I was in London when I got the call. I was in London when the news came through. A train pulls out of the railway station. My father in the window waves goodbye. My mother, never a happy traveller, waiting on the platform, hopes to catch a glimpse of him. Phone messages. Why don't you call me? They shouldn't leave us all alone like this. I've been sitting here for hours. How do you know how to find me here? You won't be able to find me here. You won't pick up to me. What's wrong with you? It's 4 a.m. We're trying to get hold of you from New York, Goa, Marrakesh, Hanoi, Berlin. I'm so afraid. Let's go to Paris. Pick up the bloody phone. There is a suitcase on the chair where you were sitting yesterday. I experience extreme synesthesia. You have to leave when I cannot. Sometimes I sleep all day. Dream 3. We travelled overnight. We took the night train up beyond the Arctic Circle. The temperature read -30. When we stepped off the train with rucksacks, sturdy boots, the town snowbound, snow piled up in blankets, the station master played White Christmas on a horn to welcome us. We waited on the wooden platform painted blue. You gathered snowflakes big as plates, like the ones you showed me how to cut from paper once. Nothing moved at all. We were alone on the wooden platform painted blue. We became elective mutes, like Hornby figures in our silent little world. We waited there for hours. Daylight came and went. There was no difference between day and night. I could see the headlights of another train kilometers away, but it never reached the station. Where are you? When are you going to come home? It's getting dark so early now. They shouldn't leave us all alone like this. Hospital. Whilst absent from my life, I think about America, although I have never been there. I'm dressed in cocktail black and drinking in the Hamptons, just as you were when the phone call came, whilst signing for a suitcase at the hospital, the police station, the lost and found, whilst waiting for the registrar or in the desperate late-night cafe in the hospital. I slide reckless into dreams about abandoned buildings, silent, dark, and full of flies and dusty tea lights. All aboard, who's going aboard? Are you coming home? It's the greatest show on earth, the Wall of Death. For one night only, for your entertainment, boys and girls, he is riding a wild gurney, wearing nothing but a blindfold, with his knapsack on his back. You're a bird in flight. Now you see him, now you don't. And now you don't. Are you never coming home? You are an astronaut orbiting the Earth in your capsule on the SSMRI. You are absent. These are days that will be marked forever with a white stone in my mind. When the plug was pulled, it became an inevitable act of mutual destruction. There was the one who cried and the one who never stopped. Christmas was cancelled. Water circled drains and sinks throughout the hospital. We were not the only ones. No amount of bleaching could remove the sights, the sounds, the smells, or stop the dirty water backing up, so that I had to plunge my hands in it again and again and again. Garden. You were gone. Before we could repair the rupture, fix the fracture, stem the bleed, assist the breath, your absence lies alone now, swollen in a hospital gown. How are you dead? How are you? Your presence lingers on the lane, around the piano, behind the silent sewing machine, through each season of this terrible year, in the white flowers and objects I reflect on in my garden. How can you not be here in this wild white abstraction? House. Sparrow in the chimney tumbles unlit into wood stove, taps on glass, windows flung wide open, white curtains billow into room, bird released unharmed and white with ash. Watch her as she disappears into the blue. Body fades. End. Thank you. Sorry, that was a bit of a marathon. Just going to end with the last 3 poems in the collection. The first one is The Sin Eaters. Just a little bit of background to this. So, since the early 1600s, sin eating was a common practice across rural areas of the British Isles. Grieving family members would gather around the corpse to drink ale and mourn, and a sin eater would eat the sins of the deceased by consuming food which had been placed on the chest of a dead person. And in this way, the soul would be allowed into heaven. Excuse me, I'm just going to let my dog out. Oh. So sorry. The Sin Eaters. Our place is set. 2 silver knives, 2 forks for lychee and veined oysters, beefsteak and codfish, sole cake and salted butter, 2 spoons, deep dished for glistening consommé, veal shank, hen leg, shallow for a medlar jelly, 2 glasses for the wine, a spicy red. We are the sin eaters, gluttonous and honey glazed, swallowing the ortolan behind our napkins, spitting out the bones and beak. This feast is rich and gamey, malodorous, corrupt and sweet. The delicacy, delicately lying beneath marzipan and sugar icing, thick as time. Midwinter funeral in the valley. The Met Office predicts a heavy fall of snow. There was another funeral 5 years ago. Broad-shouldered bearers, young men from the valley, slipped on black ice. The coffin lurched like the stomachs of the mourners who, with one collective indrawn breath, uplifted him, the son, the brother, father, willed the dreadful cargo through the chapel door. Thick time. Returning to the moment, whilst hoping against hope, time is the weight and thickness of my father's felted overcoat, my mother's fur. Constructing an invisibility whilst washing dishes, time is a sonnet unwritten, a fault revealed in time told by an unreliable clock. Pleasures of self-deception, while sweeping up the broken glass, time tears the heart out, rips it up, pushes it back in and tells us to get on with it. Whichever page you open, there you are. Whilst scrambling towards the exit, time presses a thick bandage to the mouth. We start with love, and we should end with love. That's me done. Thank you.
Jill.
Yeah, thank you.
That was extraordinary. And the long poem, particularly the title poem, it's such a wonderful, it was a privilege to hear it, really. And it's just occurred to me, you're there at the Ted Hughes Centre, and that poem for three voices of Sylvia Plath's, you will remind me of that, I think, that remarkable tour de force that Sylvia Plath wrote too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jill.
Even the dog's a fan.
Oh yeah, that was great, the way the dog came in just at the right time. Fantastic.
Yeah. And now Sarah Wimbush is going to read from The Last Dinosaur in Doncaster. I edited Sarah, so I'll say something about her. She's the winner of both the Dyslexia Poetry Competition 2016 and the Dyslexia Poetry Pamphlet Competition 2019. Her debut pamphlet, Bloodlines, was published by Seren, and it explores her gypsy traveller heritage. In 2019, she received a Northern Writers Award and second prize in the Ledbury Poetry Competition. She comes from Doncaster, like all the best people, and currently lives in Leeds. During Sarah's reading, she's also going to have a film poem based on her poem Near Extinction, which is made by her father, so it's very clearly talented family. It was a pleasure to edit Sarah's work, not least because she's an outstanding and very unusual writer, but in this collection particularly, her subject matter is very close to my heart. So Ian McMillan said about this collection, the writing felt local and universal, like much good writing does, saying new things about old subjects like the miners' strike and growing up. And there was a powerful anger in the poems that didn't overwhelm them, but fueled their articulacy.
That's good, isn't it? Yeah. Ian McMillan. And Imtiaz Dharker wrote a poem. Well, it's a comment, but it reads like a poem. The Last Dinosaur in Doncaster is a vivid love poem to the changing landscape of South Yorkshire and its residents. The poet suggests the teeming life of the place with language that rolls along in its own lively music and with images that sing.
So, Sarah Wimbush will hand over to Sarah.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Peter.
Go.
It's lovely to be reading here today as one of the winners of the Poetry Business Book and Pamphlet Competition. I'm a big fan of the North and many Smith doorstop poets, so it's lovely to be part of that family, and great to hear Jill and Rosalind's poems so far. You know, it's great to hear them. Having read them, you know, it's nice, but to hear them is fantastic. So I'm going to dive straight in and get into the poems. My first poem is about pencil sharpening, Since this poem, people have seen this poem, you know, everybody's been telling me what their dads used to sharpen their pencils with. There's been all sorts coming out of the drawer, Stanley knives and cutthroat razors and you name it. But the consensus is that whatever, it was a job that only dads could do. The pencil sharpener. Fridays were pencil sharpening. Like a bus conductor's ticket machine clamped on the teacher's desk, that squeeze to uncurtain the cavity, insert a stub, then turn the lever with a whir until out came a skin fresh pencil, pastry skirt, the point a tack. All the pencils in the pot, uniform, striped, red and black. Our pencils were oddments drawn from Argos and Mum's work. Spelling nights, Dad would shear the carving knife with a steel. Once, twice, a third to set the edge, then slicing forwards, peel a pencil like a pear. He'd blow the ice pick tip and jab his thumb to test for firmness. Then, above the whiteness, he'd excite the air with tiny circles. I imagined words like daughter, sharpen, write. So this next little poem is a poem very close to my heart. It's about a pub in Edlington that's now a restaurant and takeaway. But it's quite a significant building because before you sink a pit and create the infrastructure in a pit village to make the pit work, you know, the miners' houses, the school, the village hall and that kind of thing, you had to build a hostelry, really, a pub, a hotel for all the engineers and the building surveyors to stay at and to be able to have a drink at after a day's work. And that's what the York was. The York, Edlington. Opposite what was the manager's house and next to the old junior school, the haunt of floorboards creaking under the early shift's pit boots. Chaplain eyes follow ale up to the rim. Harry's whispers in the barmaid's hair, her intoxicating laugh, her skin. The clean taste of bitter, the hush of a domino game. Outside, a blue electric sign above the door. Walk 1. So I thought the rest of the poems I would read tonight would all be mining poems. It seemed like a nice thing to do to sort of celebrate mining culture, my own coal mining heritage as well. So a couple of miles down the road from where I grew up was the village Armthorpe, and the colliery at Armthorpe was called Markham Main. Afternoons, they meet up on street corners like old youths planning revolution. Gaffers, fathers, brothers, an hour at the club with a pint. Go over the end again and again. How they will last by 3 days to stay out in Yorkshire. How they'd go back tomorrow. After school, they take the grandkids to the pit top playground. Look forward to the night shift at IKEA together. So during the miners' strike, in 94, 85, I had 2 jobs. I was doing all sorts, but on an evening and at weekends and during the holidays, I worked at Roslington Youth Club. And I remember this particular day, well, there were quite a few days like this, but this particular day, and the kids came in and they were all hot. It was like a really hot day, and they were all sweaty and excited because there'd been loads of stuff kicking off at the pit gates. And this is what came out of that. It's called Rosso Youthy, 1984. Talks all pitted gates. Men chasing men down Holmes' car, under washing lines, through Mr. Shaw's marigolds. 2 tribes reverberates through plastic orange chairs. Angie and Dirty Den hard at it in the pool room. Maureen hands out squash and sherbet dib-dabs. Food parcel handouts from the Welly soup kitchen. Hell, did you clock? Stig's old man knocked that Bobby's lid off. The amber of a cigarette, a finger held aloft, passed around like a syringe full of shit, tail drawn into a tail of drooping ash. Each son careful not to be the one to let it break away. So a welly is a shortened name for the welfare. So next I'm going to read our language, which is, I suppose it's a hymn to growing up in a coal mining area and having that heritage. So I will start. So it's our language. This is the voice. This is the sound of the broad and gubbed, the undermen, the too young, the faced up, the midnight blue tattooed. These are mouths fit to bust with fault lines and deputy sticks, the crackling of airlocks, motties, cages and tubs, throats riddled with methane and headstocks, gobstink and dog ends, of nights and days and afters, and the short walk home as dawn spills over the tip at the end of the houses. This is the language of the pony riders and jumped up checkwaymen, of Davy lamps and Dudleys, the on-cost lads and gaffers, of black nails and snap-tins and names like Arthur, passed down through time until it's more than a name. It has new meaning, like the word giant or stone. It is not dull wallers, nor the never never, nor the light-fingered, no more to be pitied than talked about, although talked about all the same. It is making your mark with a cross and having faith in what is beneath. It's friendship. It's fuck the bastards. This is the tune of the haulage boys and shot firers and Elvis impersonators, their legs smashed to bits at the bottom of shafts, and the women who feed everyone's children. Sometimes the words speak for themselves at galas or picket lines, or not at all on those rare rest days by a well-stocked lake where men of rock are silenced by a distant horizon. I could catch this language and write it out for those who want to know. I could place it in their palm to hold like a squab and watch it swell with all its boot rooms and slack, because our language still exists. It roars by gas fires and at the far table in the club and in the living museum beside the image of a man digging forever through a coal seam 2 foot thick. It is black lung and unwritten songs. It is soup kitchens, work fests, hewers, picks. So my last poem is going to be a film poem, Near Extinction, but I just wanted to say a couple of things before that's played. First of all, I have to thank the photographer, John Harris, for allowing me to use some photographs in the film poem, and Ray Johnson from Staffordshire Film Archive for allowing me to use some of the archive footage that they have. It certainly made the film a lot more interesting, I think. And linking back to Rosington Youth Club, there's a particular image in this film of the miners sat on a barricade with a stop sign on the right-hand side. And that was actually photographed at Rosington. Before I go, I just want to say thank you to the judges, Imtiaz Dharker, Ian McMillan, Anne and Peter Sampson, for selecting my pamphlet as one of the winners in the competition. And also particularly to Anne for working through and editing through the poems with me. It was a lovely experience. Congratulations to the other girls, Jill and Rosalind, and I'm looking forward to hearing your poems as well, Penny. And I think that's it. So if you could play the film poem, that would be lovely. Thank you. Thanks for listening. No otters in the River Don. No rest for Sylvia, Grant, Dalton. Upholding Brodsworth Hall. Subsidence scribbled on the wall. The roof, a drain, gardens besieged, a losing battle. Down the lane, Brian at Brodsworth Pit, with his mullet and denim jacket, windswept, sun-kissed, convinced they can turn the tide in landlocked South Yorkshire. Rosington, like Beirut. Mrs. Selby watching ghosts of picket line past. Burned out cars, burned out hearts. Mr. Selby in his chair, waiting for the snowdrops. An action shot of Leslie Boulton, camera in hand, the raised baton, a pin-up girl at Highfields Welfare. Wives on battle stations in the soup kitchen. Men fed first. Outside the new Frenchgate Centre, a band of brothers riddled with badgers, rattle buckets, miners' children's Christmas party. All around the world turned outside in. Paul, just 19, marching back with the shift and his grandad to Markham, Maine. End of the line. Final man down under that headgear. The last dinosaur in Doncaster.
Thank you, Sarah. That was wonderful. Lovely, lovely reading, and the film really moving too. Thank you so much. Okay. And our last reader this evening is Wendy Pratt, who'll be reading from her collection, When I Think of My Body as a Horse. A few things about Wendy. She's an award-winning poet, author, workshop facilitator living on the North Yorkshire coast. She's the author of 4 collections of poetry and is widely published in magazines and journals. Wendy is a columnist for Yorkshire Life magazine and was the first female editor of Dreamcatcher. She's currently working on a collection of creative non-fiction essays which explore the effect of landscape and nature on the way we grieve. I edited Wendy's manuscript, and while I would say it was a pleasure to work with such outstanding poems, it was also very, very moving experience. And I think anyone who has seen this collection will say that, you know, the same, that it touches people. The impact of her writing and the real skill and control of her writing is astonishing. Ian McMillan said, "These are powerful, heartbreaking, but ultimately transcendent poems about loss, grieving, and recovery, articulated through the prism of the natural world. Hares, rabbits, horses make us look hard at ourselves and our place in the order of things. And through the skill of the writer, we become somehow more human, more complex, the more we look into the eyes of these creatures."
And Imtiaz Dharker said, "When I think of my body as a horse is packed with images of the body in transformation of one kind or another. Through cycles of pregnancy and grief, there is an animal momentum to the poems that gives the whole sequence its sustained power."
So welcome, Wendy Pratt.
Hi, everybody in YouTube land. It is absolutely lovely to be here, and I just want to say, first of all, congratulations to the other readers who have just been an absolute pleasure to listen to. I don't know how I'm going to follow it, and thank you to the judges who chose this collection as one of the winners, and also thanks to Anne and Peter, and Anne in particular, for taking poems that are quite brutal in places. They cover brutal themes about baby loss and grief and trauma and recovery and shame. And she took those poems and she delicately edited them and gave me the respect as a poet, as well as someone who experienced a traumatic event. I'm not going to talk too much about the collection. I want the poems to really speak for themselves. That's it really. This is a book about my experience of baby loss and body ownership and shame, and an alternative story of motherhood. The first poem is called "For the Bridge Beneath Which I Became a Flock of Pigeons." You say voluptuous, you say soft, you say here, like this, stand like this. And a train hurtles by so close, the lights halo your hair. The noise is thrilling. The shock stink of metal, the hot tremble of it, the people, their books and papers in their rectangles of solitude. And yes, some of them must see this. Some of them must carry this away with them, in the scream of metal on metal, which is soft and quiet as a padded cell to them. I am electrified by this close moment, physically pinioned and letting the sound drive through me, letting the scream of wheels vibrate the very bones of me until I start to come apart. My hair shakes free from its roots and wafts in strands carried away by the train. My nails extract themselves, embed themselves like bullets in the rough-hewn stone of the bridge. My cells begin to tug and pull apart, skin cells, mucosa, muscle fibres whipping out like electricity cables, and there is nothing to me now but a sudden startle of feathers, a flock of pigeons clattering out from beneath the bridge's eaves, train lights receding, the curve of the track in the distance. The next poem I'm going to read is called 2 Week Wait. And the 2 week wait is a period of time after you have had IVF and you have the embryos replaced. There is a 2 week wait before you can do a pregnancy test, and it's referred to as the 2 week wait within pregnancy and infertility community support sites, of which I was heavily a part at the time when this book was written, or started out, when this experience was happening. So this is 2 week wait. Love turned the dial up and watched us burn. Love caught us like frog spawn and cupped us in the light of a duck egg blue day. Love breathed and whistled and lifted our faces and touched us gently as truth must do, and ran us through like soap suds on washing day. Like clean sheets on the line, we were lifted by the breeze and the breeze let us breathe. Love was needles and charts and scans. Love was clinic visits and operations. Love riddled us with drugs. Love shook us with hope. Love gave us you. Love lost us birth. Love lost us all. It's very strange reading poems in a Zoom room when you're all out there on YouTube, because usually you go to these poetry events and I can see the audience and I can feel what they're feeling and sort of feed back on it. So I'm just sitting here in my bedroom and it's so weird because I can just hear my cat outside the door as well, wanting to come in. Apologies if he does come in. I'm hoping that he won't, not in the middle of a sad poem anyway. So this next poem is called The Circle of Sisters, and it's really about the moment at which, the moment at which my daughter died and I stopped being a part of this circle of motherhood. And it was brought home to me as a member of an infertility support group, and I'd been on this thread that was about all the babies that were due to be born at the same time. And everyone was chatting and everyone was talking about what they were buying and how they were setting up their nurseries. And then my baby died, my daughter died. And I had to go on this site and say, the baby's gone, we've lost the baby, we've lost our daughter. And everyone was really kind. There was about 15 people in the site, in that group. And they all commiserated and were very kind and left messages. And then the feed was feeding down. And then at some point, someone said, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm really sorry." And then 2 lines down, this conversation started about, "Oh, where's everyone getting their sterilisers? Where's everyone getting their nappies from?" And that was it. I was gone. And the world sort of closed over my head. And that was the end of it. And it was the strangest, most isolating feeling. And I found when I went back into the world that there was this isolation continued. It continued for a long time as well. People didn't know what to do with me. So this is called The Circle of Sisters. I fell backwards out of the circle of my sisters and found their arms tight around each other. They were facing inwards and their prams were locked like spokes on a turning wheel. They danced the dance of all the mothers in the world, and their bodies kept the rhythm in a shush and rock of linked arms and soft words. I shouted at the gaps between their cashmere soft backs, but each time I opened my mouth, the beauty and tragedy of my daughter formed. It frightened the circle. For years I crept round the edges like a wolf, wanting them to domesticate me, but they sensed a danger in my shape and shooed and hissed. I became an embarrassment. I was no longer a sister of the circle, but my body couldn't forget their dance. So I danced in the shadow of my sisters and shouted my daughter's story through the gaps. This poem's quite one of the poems that I would describe as one of the brutal poems in the collection, and it is about the experience of our experience, my experience, but an experience that happens to a lot of people. A lot of people are infertile, a lot of people lose their babies and then go on and have to have continuous IVF if they want a biological child. So this is really a story about how even after we lost, her name was Matilda, my daughter Matilda, we couldn't really stop. There was no time to stop. We had to keep trying and moving forward. And it left me in this place where nothing was ever finished. There was no end to it. It went on and on and on. So this is a poem really that explores that. And it's called Schrodinger's Baby. Schrodinger's baby is both alive and dead, both a stillbirth and a resuscitation attempt. In a box, on a slab, in my arms, in a basket, in a bag, all of these. Schrodinger's baby doesn't go into the ground with my dead daughter. Schrodinger's baby continues to exist in the paperwork of the IVF clinic, in the perfume you are not allowed to wear, in the vitamin pills, the weight gain. Schrodinger's baby is even laid flat and blue in the negative pregnancy test. Schrodinger's baby crucifies herself in red on the chart stuck to the wardrobe door. This on-off yes-no baby is swaddled in this time next year, and this might be the last Christmas with just us two, and make the most of this time because, and you'll miss the sleep and lie-ins, and at least you can have fun trying, and some babies are just quiet, and your baby is measuring too small, and I'm sorry she didn't make it. Schrodinger's baby is in the drawers of unworn nappies, the cot bedding. Schrodinger's baby is morphine, is wine, is vodka, is dieting, is running and running. One day, in that dark box full of atoms and nuclear potential, Schrodinger's baby dies for real. Schrodinger's baby's mother escapes in a tide of grief in which she is both alive and dead also. And there is never an answer to anything, and the box is too small for this half-life. The box was always too small for this half-life. The next poem is another one of the very personal, quite brutal, I would describe them as brutal poems. And it was about, because I'm a recurrent depression sufferer, I sort of live with recurrent depression. Comes and goes. But when I lost my daughter, and through that whole trauma of trying again, and also there was an added dynamic to the situation in which there was an investigation into her death, and it was proved that there had been mistakes during our care which may have led to her death, which proved to have led in part to her death. And the depression came back, and it materialised with a lack of sleep, insomnia, and my hat goes off to anyone who survives insomnia, because it just is awful. To go without sleep is just awful, and it does send you a bit mad. So this is really a poem about grief and depression and insomnia and trying to find help. When there were more bad days than good. When there were more bad days than good, I smashed into myself full force like a woman running from a fire, screaming, "My baby, my baby, my baby." Having abandoned myself at the roadside, I went looking for my body in bogs, under bridges, in crawl spaces and gas ovens. I found it crying to a receptionist. They told me that a lack of sleep was not an emergency and I couldn't come in. So I cleaved my way in like a fireman with an axe into their burning building. I demanded pills. I built a small box with a prescription and a pill-sized hammer to break into it, and I snatched my baby from her grave and stuffed her back into myself. I went around wearing old maternity clothes and being given Mother's Day cards and flowers. I bowed for the applause that the world gave me for being successfully pregnant and not letting my baby die in a fire or in an emergency delivery or in a failed resuscitation attempt. But it wasn't really about that. Oh, there was coffee in between, and we played the game in which I was the fire burning my own house down and the past was a long time ago. We discussed how its sparks couldn't keep igniting me if I didn't let them. And besides, there were fire blankets laid about my feet, and everyone was asking me why I didn't just use the blankets to put the fire out. But there were no instructions with the blankets, and I'd never been very good with instructions anyway, except break here in case of emergency. But it wasn't an emergency. I just couldn't sleep. There are lots of poems in the book that are about acceptance and about accepting the failures of the perceived failures of the body, of my body. I suppose I'm the narrator in this collection. And I think this is one of the poems that start to explore that. So this is towards the end of the collection. And it's called Rabbit Heart. It can't all be pain. When I get used to leaning into the source without the narrative, when it is just the blood and guts of it, I find her again. She's been away in the dark earth, tunnelling back up to me. My ribs swing open, my heart pulses like a placenta, and the joy of her birth is a strip of rabbit fur so soft that if I touch it, I can't feel it. This is how her skin was when I first held her. This strip of fur has the flesh still attached, not butchered, not torn, but whole, red, healthy. It doesn't seem strange that my heart has a strip of rabbit fur entwined with the veins. It flutters and stamps like the first cells squirming with the first heartbeat, and I was always half rabbit anyway. This experience of grief lasted a long, long time, and it came to a head when my husband and I, we had 5 rounds of IVF and 2 miscarriages alongside the loss of our daughter. And in the end, we were both getting a bit old, and we just decided that we'd had enough. We looked into adoption, we looked into our other options, donors and things like that. We looked into adoption, and the time it would have taken, we were so exhausted. It was the end. So we made the decision to stop trying. We'd made the decision to go into the future, accepting childlessness and building a life in which there was just us two. And I still couldn't get over it, and I still was wrestling with it for a long, long time. And then I had this collection that I'd been writing for about 6 years, it originally being part of my master's. And then I went a bit mad, decided to cut a third of the collection out, all in one fell swoop, like a nutter. And then all of a sudden, the poems were there, ready to be written, and it was all I could write. And I wrote these poems, and it was done, and it was like being released. And I think this is the power of poetry, that it can be a translative, transformative tool, not cathartic, not an answer, but part of dealing with something, part of translating something and transforming it. So this is a poem about that, really. It's called 9 Years Mourning. 9 years of mourning. Get it right, Wendy. When my grief finally breaks, I shed the embarrassment of mourning like a skin. I have been sick with grief, heavy with it, entombed by it. For so long, I have atrophied within it. Unable to escape it, unwilling to let her go again, 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 I treated grief as atonement, punishment for her death. Now I see it was the perfect counterweight for my love. There is a snap, a snip of umbilicus. We slide apart. I step away. Today I climb out of my skin, my morning dress. I am nude and white as a stripped willow branch. I leave the dress behind, stiff with the sweat of surviving. I leave behind its brutal blacks, its corset, so like the mouth of a fledgling wanting more. Only I know the comfort of the pink inside of that dress. It is time now. Now I wish I'd not been embarrassed by how long it took to say goodbye. Now I wish I'd worn a great collar of Whitby jet and shaved my head and walked on my knees mouthing ash for 9 years. People might have understood that better. It doesn't matter. Here I am, lithe as a witch hare leaping out of a corpse, catching the sun in my tawny coat. I have one more poem. This is the title poem of the collection, and it is about acceptance again, body acceptance, and finding a way to be kind to yourself. When I think of my body as a horse, now I think of my body as a horse. I think of it not as a vessel for my soul or as an organic robot or a means of transport, but as another thing I need to love and care for. We do not share a language. When my body asks for rest, I have to know the signs, have to watch the way its elegant legs stutter when it's tired. All those years I tried to train it by punishment. How I hated its disobedience, how I felt ashamed of it. Poor body. I tried to cut myself away from it. I scarred it, I starved it, I taught it to be afraid of mirrors. I taught it a language of pain. Now my body is a horse, I see it is loyal, it is incredible. I line all the bones of my body up from the nasal bone to the thin string of tail and marvel at its complexity. I do not blame it for lost babies. It did its best. I do not blame myself for lost babies. I did my best. I ride my body in a slow companionship, comforting it at the end of the day, and I say, body, you are beautiful. You are beautiful. Thank you so much.
Wow, that was rather amazing.
Thank you, Wendy. Absolutely stunning reading. I know you said you were in your bedroom, but we happen to know that you've broken into the Scarborough Waterstones since there's nobody about.
It's true.
Making your bed in Scarborough Waterstones, that's fantastic. Everybody's going to come back, aren't they? And I hope there's going to be some questions.
Yeah, we don't seem to have any yet. So.
There are some questions.
Yeah.
I think we should ask Rosalind a question first because she's so far away from everyone. And Rosalind, I think you're the newest writer. Is that right?
Very much so. Yeah, these are really the first poems that I've written. So the earliest one in the collection is the first one, and that is the spring of 2018. And the others are all quite recent. It took me a long, long time to have the courage to go for it, really. I thought I couldn't do it. So there's a lesson there, I think, isn't there? Of some kind.
So busy doing other things like dance and
yeah, and I was always immersed in poetry and reading lots of poetry and trying to write, but it just didn't happen until quite recently, really. Yeah.
Can we ask everyone how they started writing and why, perhaps? Jill?
I've been writing ever since I could write, I think. And I was saying to a friend of mine that winning this competition has finally, at my old age, finally convinced me that I am actually a writer. And it's just been the most amazing experience. So I'm sure everybody else will agree with me. Peter and Anne, thank you so much for hosting the competition, and to the judges, thank you as well. And Peter, thank you for your fantastic editing that's allowed this to happen. And for tonight, it's just been, I'm so blown away by Wendy, by Sarah, by Rosalind. I'm just so thrilled to be part of this fantastic company of female writers. It's amazing. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
It's quite a lineup, isn't it?
Yeah, quite a
Everyone's
lineup.
so
It is.
distinctive.
It is all so different, all so powerful.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's great. We, you know, that impulse to enter the competition is clearly a good one. It's always worth a go, obviously, but you know, to put a manuscript together and just send it off, knowing that, you know, it's going to arrive somewhere, and then I suppose forgetting about it as far as you can. So that's one of the great pleasures in our job, is ringing people up and telling them.
Yeah, you always do that.
I always, yeah, I try and do that, because, you know, people are always amazed, and, you know, they don't believe it. And they always think, have you made a mistake, or can this really be? So I think Ellen might have found some people this year, but that is a big pleasure for us. So obviously seeing what's in effect the finished product now,
Yes,
and hearing it, it seems, I don't know, it seems unreal to us. It must do to you.
we have a parallel competition, don't we, for younger writers, writers under 24, is it? Anyway, the New Poets Prize. And when Anne rang up one of the winners one year, I think Helen Morton, the judge, discovered that he was out in the garden, his wife was getting him to get the grandchildren in. And fortunately, he didn't win. You know, we put him in the north, but we said, actually, you're a little bit old.
So
that
74 or something. He'd just been put into the wrong category. So that was...
Which just proves the anonymity of it all.
Yeah.
Can very quickly, because we've got a couple of questions in now, but Sarah and Wendy, would you just quickly say how you started writing?
Yeah, I started writing poetry about 10 years ago, just by chance, really. It was purely accidental. So I think I've always been a bit of a poet. I think it's always been there, but I never really had the, not so much the opportunity, but it just never sort of came along. But I've got to tell you that when I found out that I'd won the competition, I was actually just leaving Doncaster, and my pamphlet was called The Last Dinosaur in Doncaster. That was the name I submitted. And I was literally just leaving Doncaster to come home to Leeds. So it just seemed like, you know, it was just pure. It was meant to be, and that was wonderful. So and I sort of want to echo what Jill says and everybody else. It's been wonderful, and I really appreciate being able to be published with Smith Stallstop and the poetry business.
Okay, we have got some questions as well. So when Wendy.
Well, I think I started writing probably around 2008. Wasn't that long ago? Oh, actually, that's quite a long time ago now, isn't it? Time has passed differently. And I think I started writing because I joined an OU Introduction to Poetry course. And it was one of those things where poetry hadn't really been part of my life before that. I don't really come from a background where poetry was part of the conversation in either school or home, and but I'd really always wanted to do it and wanted to have a go at it. And I think that OU Introduction to Poetry course was my gateway drug into poetry. And here I am. Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
One of the questions. Shall I read this one?
Yeah.
From Susanna, actually, is could you talk a bit about the process of transforming the very personal into a poem, particularly Wendy and Jill, but anyone who'd like to answer? It's quite a hard question, Jill.
First.
Yeah.
I didn't transform it at all. It just appeared on the page as it was in my head. I wrote it really quickly. It was all there, and it all came out in a terrible rush. And I had no shame or fear about it, because it was just something that I needed to do.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Right, it's obviously true.
Yeah. And Wendy?
I think for me, I think poetry for a long time has been how I dealt with all sorts of things. It's a way of making something that's happened, putting a distance between it. So there's a sort of an event, and then there's the poem, and then there's you, and it's a way of sort of turning it around and examining it and exploring it until it fits into your life, until you can fit it into your life. So that it felt, this collection in particular felt very organic in the way that it came to be. I want to say it wrote itself, but it wrote itself, and then I spent years crafting it and working on it. But yeah, and I do feel that it was a transformative way of looking at something for me. Translative. It translated it into a language that I could read and understand. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's something that we believe very, very much, that about translating experience into language, and yeah, and then seeing what's there. It's more discovery than transformation. Sorry, we've got a cat walking across the screen. They're not quite as disciplined as Michael McGregor's cats, or your dog, Joe, who went out pretty sharpish. Okay.
Shall I ask another question?
Another question.
Matt Richards says, what was the last thing that went through your mind when you pressed send on the submission, and how far was it from the close of the window for the entry date? So, Rosalind.
That's a great question. Now, I actually sent mine off in the post, because I have a sort of innate distrust of electronic applications, because many, many years ago I missed out on a job because it was scrambled at the other end. And I wanted to send it off physically on paper. It was very, very close to the closing date. I think it would have arrived the day before. And I had it in my bag for a couple of days and was really unsure about whether I was going to go through with it, because I didn't know if it was good enough. So there you go. But yes, I sent it off in the post, not electronically.
Yeah.
Did all of you send it in the post? No.
No.
That used to be the majority, because we used to live with like 10 cardboard boxes all over Christmas in the house, which of course doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how people prefer to enter.
Yeah, and the postman arriving at the office with huge sacks on the last two or 3 days. But before that, it's just a trickle. Poets can't seem to commit until the last minute. They're always revising their poems, maybe.
Yeah.
Sarah?
Yeah, I was going to say, so do you print them all off now, or do you read them on screen?
Well, at the moment, because it's everybody, it would be, excuse me, we won't be able to get through them. So we read them on screen now.
And all of the shortlisted ones.
We
all
read
of the long shortlist.
Yeah, we read every one of them. We both read every one of them. So Peter starts maybe at the first ones, and I start at the bottom, and we cross over that way. And then when we've decided to longlist someone, we do print those out. Yeah. And then we can, because I like to walk around reading things out loud and, handling them. And then from then on, it's all electronic, isn't it? So yeah, it's changed this year, obviously, but we did used to be wading through them.
How close to the deadline was everybody when they sent?
Can you remember?
I was right on the deadline.
Yeah.
Yeah, last minute.
Yeah.
I don't think I left mine too late. I tend to forget things if I leave them too late. So I don't think it will have been that late. But
good for you.
Yeah. Well, that's good, because that obviously cheers us up, because we think we're going to survive. If we get half a dozen people who've entered, we think it's not all so it's great to enter in good time. But usually people do hang about as long as they can bear to, and then it's like, oh, I'll give it a go. What about you, Jill?
As well as Peter knows, to my shame and to his with a nod to his extreme patience, I had probably about 30 or more different versions. I'm quite inept with technology, so I had stacks of paper printed out. I had this landslip of everything all around my desk, and I just basically sent off a random selection of these poems. And then when we came to edit, some of them were quite different, and it was quite alarming for me. There was many phone calls saying, oh no, that wasn't the version I wanted. And I do apologize, Peter. I know it was
no, that's normal.
Interesting process.
That's just normal.
It is normal.
What's abnormal is when people are really, really well organised and they know what they're doing.
It's great for me. It was great for me, Jill, because I see you as the soul of efficiency and always be on top of things. I've never known you let anything get past you, and it's just our daughter's a bit like that, our older girl. So when she makes a mistake, I never let her forget it. It's brilliant.
No, it's good, bit disorganised, but all of you.
That rather dovetails with the question from Zana Caird, which was, how much did your submitted poems change in the editing process once you? So, Sarah.
Not too much, but I think the changes that were made were very exacting, and they needed to be done. And there were some poems that I didn't know what was wrong with them, and it just needed a few things tweaking that made all the difference. So that's how I felt about it, and it was just those little changes that made massive difference to the whole thing, brought the whole thing together.
I think that's usually the case. I mean, sometimes with manuscripts, people in the time that we're spending with them, they're writing new things that they like. Maybe they've written a new poem, they like it more than something that's in, and we're really flexible with people changing things, taking something out and putting a different poem in, or that sort of thing. So it depends really on the manuscript, how much and what the changes are. And although these are the manuscripts that you've sent to us, and they're clearly working, for us and the other two judges, every manuscript needs a bit of editing and things being changed and just being made a bit clearer, really. That's what it is. So
I seem to remember, Rosalind, you hit the ground running really with the editing process. You did quite a lot.
I did. Yes, I think this is again to do with me being a new writer. So although when I sent the pamphlet off, I was happy that it was finished and it was a complete piece of work, because all the poems were quite recent, I felt that I had more to say, and I kept writing after I'd submitted it as well. So I did take a few out and put a few new ones in. So yes, mine did change quite a lot, and it was lovely to have that flexibility and to feel that I could still really shape the collection after it had been announced as a winner. So yeah, mine did change quite a lot, yes.
Because what we want is for the writer to be really happy with the collection in the end. For us to be happy with it, obviously, but for the writer to think, yeah, this is what I was aiming for. This is what I really, imagined it might be. And sometimes it takes another person, doesn't it, another writer, to look at something and say, you can make that a bit clearer. Yes. But, that's really the top and bottom of what we're doing. Make it a good collection that you like and you're proud of.
Wendy, did you want to say something?
Only that the editing process was just one of the most positive experiences of my life as a writer. I thought it was just, from start to finish, handing these poems over to people that I respected so much as editors, and having and trusting that, because there was a huge amount of trust involved for me. It was just one of the most, I would just tell anyone to enter this competition, because it is more than just a competition. It's about developing a manuscript, and it was very, very positive for me. So just thanks again.
Oh, that's fantastic.
No, that's a lovely thing to say. Thank you.
I can see that we're right up against the end of the evening, aren't we? It's been a really smashing and special time that people can watch on YouTube, and you can even buy the book. Of course, you can buy the pamphlets. Go online, do it via YouTube, clicking on that, or going to our website. That would be great. I can't resist closing by reading what the Poetry School said. Jonathan Edwards, your mate Jonathan Edwards, who didn't know he'd said this. The Poetry Business Competition is a great record of giving this exciting new work, and has unearthed so many stunning new voices, each adding to the richness of what this competition has gifted to us across many years. And tonight is a real example of it at its best, really.
Yeah.
We've been running for 35 years. I think this is the strongest we've ever had, this quartet of poets. And they're always good, aren't they? The judges always choose good poets, but remarkable how well you work together. You know, your very different collections all speak clearly and together, as it were.
What an evening.
Yeah.
What an absolute stunning evening it's been, really. Half the time been tearful, some of the time I've been laughing. It's just, yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.